Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on when you are watching this. Today, we are Group 5. We're going to present the material of modality, scope, and quantification. Our group consists of Aida, who will explain scope, Dita, who will explain modality, and me, myself, who will explain quantification. So without further ado, the next part will be explained by my friend Dita on modality.
Modality is the term for a cluster of meanings centered on the notion of necessity and possibility. So basically, modality is centered on necessity and possibility. Let's take a look at the example. The first sentence is convey about necessity, and the second sentence is convey about possibility. Let's move to the next slide. And here is a list of modals with examples. Modal verb must, expressing strong obligation, logical conclusion or certainty. And modal verb must not, expressing prohibition, can, expressing ability, permission, and possibility. Next, could, expressing ability in past, polite, permission, and possibility. May, expressing permission, possibility, and probability. Might, expressing polite permission, possibility, and probability. Need not, expressing lack of necessity, absence of obligation. Should, expressing 50% obligation, advice, and logical conclusion. Next, the last one, had better, expressing advice. And let's move to the next slide. Modality is classified into two types. There are deontic modality and epistemic modality. Next, deontic modality is the necessity of a person to do or not to do in a certain way. It shows the speaker's desire for the proportion expressed by the utterance. So basically, deontic models may convey two kinds of social knowledge. There are obligation and permission. Obligation is concerned with what a person must do. For example, I must phone him. I have to phone him. I need to phone him. I ought to phone him. I should phone him. Meanwhile, permission deals with someone's authority to permit somebody else to do something. For example, you can have this podcast for free. You could have this podcast for free. You may have this postcard for free. You might have this postcard for free. And next, the second type of modality is epistemic modality. Epistemic modality deals with possibility, probability, or impossibility of a certain preposition. So basically, this concern about possibility. For example, she may be in her office. So it is possible that she is in her office. And the second one, ask father, he might know. This is a possibility. So it is possible that fathers know. And the third one, you have only just had dinner. You cannot be hungry already. This is impossibility or improbability. So it is impossible that you are hungry. The last one is he serious? No, he cannot be that serious. This is impossibility or improbability. So it is impossible that he is serious. Next.
Alright, now quantification. So quantifications or quantifier are a linguistic expression that specify or quantify a set. In everyday language, they are expressed by words such as all, some, several, one, two, the, books, and etc. While in formal logic, quantification specifies for how many objects in a certain set a predicate are valid. So basically, quantifiers are words that we use to explain or express how many things are in a certain group. For example, how many dogs are domestic? Like, yeah, it's basically that. And then there are 6 types of quantifier, which we're going to explain 4 first. There's existential and universal. Existential is when the quantification is only valid for at least one object in the set, while universal is when the quantification is valid for every object in the set, like every element. That's why it uses every, each, all, where existential uses only some and un. While propositional and cardinal quantifier. Propositional is when the relationship used is asymmetric. It doesn't have symmetry. While cardinal is when the relationship being explained has symmetry. These are the words that are being used. It will be explained further after this. So cardinal, as we see before, cardinal is when it is a symmetric relation. What symmetric means is this relation. Cardinal is explaining this circle in the middle between class A, us, and then Transjakarta user. It's explained the symmetry of the relationship of these two. So I'll give you some example. So basically quantification is like math. It uses formula like this, formula. That's why it might be difficult, but let's learn it together. No class A members are Transjakarta user. C is class A members. This symbol is part of, T is Transjakarta user, equals 0. So that means there are 0 class A members who are part of Transjakarta users. That's why we use no class A members. Another example from this one is several. Several is more than 2. So greater than 2 class A members are part of Transjakarta user. But it is also less than 10. That's why we use several. Another example would be this. One class A members are Transjakarta users. So class A members that are part of Transjakarta user is only 1. This is the formula. This is a bit more complicated. C, class A members who are part of Transjakarta users equals Transjakarta users who are part of class A equals 0. That means there are no correlation between the two. No class A members are Transjakarta users, and no Transjakarta users are class A members. This is just an example. It's not part of this picture. This picture explained from this. This is an example of no. Propositional. As we see before, propositional is explaining an asymmetric relationship. So the relationship is not symmetry. That's why it explained this part of the relationship. Previously, we were explaining about this one. Now we're explaining about this one. So this is the Transjakarta user. This is the class A members. So before, we are talking about Transjakarta user, class A members who are also Transjakarta users. But now we are talking about the other part, class A members who are motorcycle users, not part of this. That's why it's not symmetry. So the formula is this. Most class A members are motorcycle users, so the focus is in motorcycle, right? The one that's not part of this. Because we assume that if you do not use Transjakarta, you are a motorcycle user. Class A members who are motorcycle users are greater than class A members who are not motorcycle user. So minus, the symbol is not part of the group, not part of motorcycle users. Less than half of Class A members are motorcycle users. Class A members who are motorcycle users are less than Class A members who are not motorcycle users. So this amount is smaller than this one. So that means it must be less than half of Class A members. While this one is few Class A members are Transjakarta users. Class A members who are part of Transjakarta users are very small compared to Class A members who are not Transjakarta users. Even though this is talking about Transjakarta users, but the focus is still this one, because the Transjakarta users are really that small, while the motorcycle users are more bigger. Universal. Universal is easier to understand because that means it's talking about every element in a group. Every Class A members are Transjakarta users. This is the symbol. Class A members, all of them are part of Transjakarta users. Universal is talking about everything, so this is the only symbol that you need to think of. All Class A members are Transjakarta users. Existential. Existential is the same like before. It's talking only about some people, some elements in the group, not every element. It's the same one. It uses several, at least, some, one. The formula is the same as cardinal and propositional, so we can skip over this. Just remember that existential is talking about several members, so the formulas are like this, the same one as the previous two ones. Okay, now the other two is distributive and collective quantifier. Distributive is when a value applies to the elements individually, while collective is when the value applies to the elements at the same time or state. For example, every is distributive because, for example, every corgi at a dog show was worth more than 1,000 pounds sterling. That means that each corgi, like every corgi there, is worth more than 1,000. If there were 10 of them, the total would be 10,000 pounds sterling. All, however, is ambiguous between collective and distributive because collective means this. If it's true that all the corgis at the show were more than 1,000, then that figure could be the value per dog or could be the total of them. So as we see before, every is distributive because it's talking about the value per dog, while all is can be collective or distributive, but because it can explain value per dog or could be the total for all of them. So just remember that distributive means the value each of the value of the person, of the dog, value per dog, while collective is the total for everything. So that means if he says all the dogs were worth more than 1,000 pounds sterling, it could mean that each dog is worth only 100 pounds sterling because this is collective, every dog, the total. Each is also another distributive quantifier like every and all, and it uses this symbol too. Example, this is another example. Each student borrowed a book. So that means as for every student, there was a book. The student borrowed it. That means every student borrowed a single book, one book, a book. While this one is one student borrowed each of the books. There was a student, for example, Gigi. Gigi borrowed every book available. The student borrowed it. This means that the student, Gigi, borrowed every book that is available. For example, there are 10 novels. Gigi will borrow each one of them. While this one, the student, every student borrows one book. Okay, so I think that's all for quantifiers. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you understand. If not, feel free to ask later. And next up will be scope by Aida.
So next, scope. What is scope? It is the relation to operators when one or more modals or quantifiers are inserted in one proposition, and it can cause more than one interpretation. So what is operator? Operator is the part that has domain over which it can affect the interpretation of the other terms within that domain. So let's take a look at these three examples of relation between scope and modality. If we hear or read these three sentences, we can say that they have same meaning. But actually, the first example has a different meaning with the second and third example. The first sentence said that it is not possible that they received the invitation. What the speaker wants to emphasize here is that there is a doubt that they received the invitations. That is why the speaker located the word not prior than the modality itself, which is, in this example, the word possible. Further, it also fulfilled the speaker's necessity to say that it is impossible for them to receive the invitation. Since it represents the necessity of the speaker, it also can be considered as a deontic modality. Or if we understand it in bahasa, it could be nggak mungkin lah mereka nerima invitation, kayak gitu. Next, let's see the difference in second and the third example. There are also modality both in second and third example. There are word possible and may, but the word not is mentioned after those modality. It means that the speaker wants to emphasize the possibility, even it is negative. Since that it represents the possibility, it can also consider as epistemic modality. Or if we understand it in bahasa, it could be mungkin aja mereka nggak nerima invitation. See, it has different sense with the first one, right? Next, so let's discuss about the relation between scope and quantifications. We will talk about quantifier as we discuss about quantifications. In the example, in the sentence, every man loves a woman. There are two quantifiers. The first quantifier is every, and the second one is a. There are also two interpretations. The first interpretation said that every man loves the same woman. It means there are some men that loves a woman. The woman here is just a woman. But let's take a look at the second interpretation. It said that every man loves some different women. It means that there are some men that loves some women. It depends on who they choose to be loved.